one of the mistakes that I've seen is that people think about how this person is going to evolve over the next 2 years. They're trying to predict in the future. So your odds of matching those two, I think, are pretty bad, because I have problems right now. I have problems today. By the time I'm hiring for an exec, I wish I had that exec 3 months ago. If they're not going well, it's highly likely that we need to mix things up at the executive level, and it may not even be your fault. I just think you've got to be hired for what's in front of your face instead of what's 2 years out. I am hiring for what the need is right now, but if you're coming in and you're fundamentally off about what the nature of the role is, I have never seen that really correct in a good way.
Welcome to Whispered Hiring, the podcast where we talk with senior leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow go-to-market talent. I'm Andy Mowat, founder at Whispered. Today I'm joined by Matt Martin. Matt is the co-founder and CEO of Clockwise, a startup that I love that basically helps you use AI-powered calendars to optimize your time, your workflow, and how you schedule. I've known Matt for years. We talked a lot about viral products when I was building my startup as well too. So Matt, great to have you here.
Super excited to be here. This will be a fun one.
Oh, I'm excited. Maybe before we dive deep, I think we could talk a little bit about how do you, help people understand what Clockwise does as well too. But we could talk about how do you schedule potential hires, right? In theory, if you are a senior leader hiring people, making yourself as available as possible for them is probably a critical component of hiring. But I'd love, and you probably think deeper than almost anyone else out there, around how do you schedule? So do you have any philosophies and your tool around how do you make yourself available for people when you're hiring them?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is pretty common advice, but I mean, hiring is a funnel, especially when you're dealing with VP, C-level executives. These are folks who are going to be busy. They're going to have other things on their plate. And you have a twofold job whenever you're trying to hire somebody. You're doing both vetting, trying to understand this person, are they a good fit for the role, but also selling. Is this going to be a good place to work? Are you going to be a good person to work with? And so my philosophy is to, whenever I'm working a funnel, increase the odds that we move to the next stage. And that often means being as flexible as possible. And so I have a little bit of an unfair advantage here, which is we have Clockwise. It can automatically move other meetings out of the way if I make myself available. So often I will have recruits, surprised by how available I can make myself for them. And I think it's a good first showing. I mean, they should probably have that expectation that I have control of my time as the CEO of Clockwise. But B, I think it makes them feel valued. I want to spend time with them. Relatedly there, and this actually works a little bit to my disadvantage with Clockwise because a lot of our scheduling tools are on desktop or via email. I really like to get into text messages as fast as possible with an exec. It's just a way to break kind of a priority threshold. If I can get that person right on text and we can go back and forth, it can be much more fluid. And I found that especially if it moves all the way through the funnel and we're into, kind of closing stages, I can be very, very responsive over text.
I like that. I've heard a lot of senior leaders say that I want to make myself as available as possible during that process because I'm effectively going to learn how you are to work with, right? If you're asking a lot of needy, useless questions, or you can't manage up during the interview process, that might be a sign. If you're asking deeply insightful questions, I'm also learning when do you respond? And so there's probably a lot of interesting observations you've got as you're getting people when you are responsive and when you are engaging people, what are you learning about people in addition to the actual conversation itself?
I don't know. This is perhaps not the best answer to your question, but I am a little bit wary about, overreading these sort of interactions because, what I really want to get to know is who's the human at the core. Can they do the job? What are their assets to come to the work environment? I think that, it can get a little bit dicey to read into signals where the signal can be very muddled or it can be, mixed for the wrong reasons. So, I prefer if somebody is very opinionated about when they want to meet, if they can come back to me with a time and say, okay, this is when, if I give them a set of times, they can just pick one and go instead of having a back and forth. They're like, oh, what works for you? What works for you? But again, this person may be in different stages of their process. They may be, either they're professionally employed or they took a break. And so people might just have different contextual reasons for scheduling the way they do that aren't related to job performance or individual. So I'm a little bit wary on reading too much in.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I had a CMO yesterday tell me, they were like, "Hey, I asked one of my people on my team, can you give me your cell phone in case the website breaks?" And they're like, "Nope." And I'm like, "Oh, interesting." Right. So I
Yeah.
I I
Yeah.
wonder if it, and I remember somebody two levels down on with one of the companies I was at. I was like, I met the person that they'd hired that rolled up to me, and I said, "Why are you excited to work here?" And they said, "Well, I really love the idea that I can leave at 5 on Friday and not think about the job until Monday." I'm like, "Oh, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's really good."
Yeah, I mean, on that front, I will say that one thing that I do like to see that is a little bit unfair because I don't ask for it is I don't want to push a candidate unless we're in closing stages or we've really become, we've upped the cadence of conversation to be something more rapid. I'm not going to push a candidate to talk to me after hours or on the weekend, but often that's the quickest time that I can talk to them. And so making themselves available or being open to that is a positive signal. And I would also advise candidates, people out there, if you're talking to C-level or you're looking for an exec role and that person, the hiring manager, is looking to talk to you at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, I don't think it's a bad sign. It's not even necessarily a sign of bad work-life balance. It might just be a sign that they really need to hire for this damn thing and they need to move the conversation forward and they care.
Yeah.
So to me, it's less about the availability and the work-life balance, and it's more about the urgency and the seriousness. Like if somebody I think is really looking to work with me and serious about the role, making time for a 15-minute call later in the evening shouldn't be a barrier.
I I couldn't agree more. And honestly, I don't want people to work 996. I think we're all now.
Yeah.
You've got kids, I've got kids. Like, I think you lose a huge portion of the audience of great potential hires if you require 996 in office. But I personally want people that are thinking about, at least at that exec level, where they're thinking about the company, and it's something that they take home with them a little bit, and they're processing it and they're passionate about it. So I think that stuff does send some interesting signals there.
Yeah, it's similar to the way that I talk about communication internally when somebody joins the company, which is if you're an exec and you're reporting directly to me, I need to have your cell phone. And that doesn't mean that I expect you to work all the time. It just means that I expect you to pick up if I have an emergency.
Bingo. Yeah, it's like we may have those, whether
Yeah.
it's website down, board needs something quickly, major customer outage or something like that.
And I don't abuse
Um,
that. I mean, some people that's the part that you have to suss out of the interview is is the hiring manager going to be a person who has that privilege and uses it all the time? That's not so great. But if they're, if they have the privilege and they use it on rare occasion when it's really warranted, at least for me personally, that's where I'd like to be.
yeah, that's a really interesting one. Is like, how do you figure that? How do you figure out that line as a candidate, right? I've seen a lot of candidates take a job and they're like, oof, different than I anticipated, and they're stuck dealing with that in a way that the companies are kind of like, oops, move on, but candidates have to deal with that. Um, you built a, I remember when you and I met, like the second or third meeting, and you were advising me on my startup, and you showed me that viral adoption of Clockwise in companies. I thought that was just such a cool chart. And you've been through these phases, right, of the viral adoption, now really maturing the company. I'm curious, what role is the hardest to hire for? And
Oh.
I'm curious if your answer is different now than it was 3 years ago when we first met.
You know, I don't know that I have a good answer to this because for me, I'm a product-oriented CEO, and to some extent, that means that roles like GTM, which you guys are really great at, is a bit tougher for me because it's a bit farther outside my wheelhouse. But I think the toughest role to hire for is product.
Yeah.
So many of the companies, it's going to depend on your company. It's going to depend on you as an individual, as a hiring manager. However, for most software companies, we're at a phase of industry where the product itself is the most important asset. You might even be a sales-oriented company or a marketing-oriented company, but the product is still at the center of it. And so that product person, that VP product or that CPO or that product leader, they're the person who's not only going to be interfacing with all the parties inside the company to facilitate what's going on, but they're going to be kind of the person who's driving forward the most important asset, and they can be the blocker to getting it done. So I find that one is that one's the toughest to get right. And it's because of the centrality of it, but it's also because the centrality of it means that it's highly specific to each company. A product leader who ripped at one company may fall on their face at the next one.
Interesting. I could not agree more. I mean, I think that also that how you communicate with your product leader is really an interesting art, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like you as a CEO needs to have an imprint of your vision on there, and so how you interface personally is almost more important in some ways as well too.
Yeah.
We were talking kind of about like before we started recording on your philosophy of like hiring for now versus hiring for future. I'd be fascinated to hear your take on that one. I think it's because I hear people think about how can candidates grow versus how can I hire for the moment. But yeah, share how you think about that.
So we were talking about this beforehand, and one of the mistakes that I've seen is that people think about how this person is going to evolve over the next 2 years. Whereas, and that all of a sudden now, I think you have two problems just right at the get-go there. One is, how confident can you be in how the company is going to evolve over the next 2 years? And if you're a mature company, maybe you can be, but I would argue that at most companies, you're already a couple steps removed from certainty because you're trying to predict in the future. At a high growth company, at a startup, I think you're really far removed. The second problem that you have is now you're also predicting based on your very limited interactions and knowledge of this person where they might be, where they might evolve in 2 years from now. And so your odds of matching those two, I think, are pretty bad. And so I think it's something to take into consideration for sure. I mean, I hire for people that I hope can grow alongside the company, that I hope to have that, we definitely want to see a growth mentality where but that even is about the now. Like, can you adapt and move on the fly quickly with urgency, given the needs of the company? Because I have problems right now. I have problems today. By the time I'm hiring for an exec, I wish I had that exec 3 months ago. And so trying to predict out like where the future is going to hold is tough. Now, I will say one last thing before I take a breath here, which is, that's not to be confused with having lack of conviction that this person can get the job done over the next year or two. You definitely have to have conviction that this person, not only can take the reins today, but can hire for the right people, can grow the organization for the next 2 years. I just think you've got to be hired for what's in front of your face instead of what's 2 years out.
I couldn't agree more. Does your philosophy allow you, do you think, to hire faster? Or, some people are like hire fast, fire fast. Other people are hire slow, fire fast. Like, do you feel because you're not also trying to solve for how are they going to grow over a certain period of time, it allows you to hire quicker too?
Yes and no. I think it kind of pairs with another expectation I have, which is that I'm hiring for this person to be really, really great over the next 2 years. And everything on top of that is gravy. Like I will work with them to grow them to meet the needs of the company beyond that 2 years. And if you look at Clockwise, the life cycle of execs on average is beyond 2 years. It's not as though I'm firing people at the end of 2 years, of course. But the need is I'm hiring for what the need is right now. And I think that coming in, that creates a better expectation for myself and the exec, which is like, I have things that you need to do with clarity right now. And we're going to work on making sure you're staying ahead of the curve over time. But we're going to have a very clear conversation about whether or not you're ahead of the curve. And it's going to be relatively obvious when we need to hire for a new exec to replace her to grow. So I don't know that it helps me hire faster, but I do think clear expectations help to hire faster, and you can probably accomplish that in a few different ways.
I like that. It's also refreshing to hear because I've got this one blog article I want to write at some point, which is why do we call them career sites when the average tenure of a go-to-market exec is 18 months? They're not careers. But I think the idea of going in with the mindset of I'm not expected to try it for 6 months and then kind of like give it up. I'm really expecting that it's at least a minimum of 2 years. It is a really mature approach. How do you communicate that expectation to candidates and set that expectation, or how do you think about that?
I do. One of the things that is not uncommon to have a conversation with the candidate is like, what's the career path at the organization if we continue to scale? And I've said several times, like my hope for you is that you continue to scale with the company as well, and then you continue to scale with the company beyond the 2-year expectation. But that's not a guarantee. That's something that needs to be earned, and we'll continue to work on together. Like our incentives are literally aligned. We're like, I don't want to have to go hire a new exec. Like it's a pain and it's thrash. And like usually I have to take over the role for a period. And so I'd much rather invest and grow the person. But it just, look, like there's one thing that I don't think is talked about enough is just the reality of the situation, which is it's not any judgment on the individual. If you're in a startup, there are a few possibilities on a 2-year horizon. Either the company is rapidly scaling, things are going well, and therefore that person has to rapidly scale themselves in order to keep up with the company. That's not always possible. Some people are really great at that. Some people aren't. Some people don't even want to. Like they like the phase that they're good at. They're specialists in that phase. And so once they elevate you beyond that phase, they go back to another company at that phase. The second possibility is that things aren't going well, in which case, if they're not going well, it's highly likely that we need to mix things up at the executive level. And it may not even be your fault. It may be that there are environmental situations. Interest rates all of a sudden went way up and you're just not growing as fast. Well, if you're not able to adapt the organization to that challenge, we might need to go find somebody else who can. Or the third is that the company's just stagnant and nobody's really paying attention, in which case, why do you want to be there? What's your growth potential for yourself? So I think that, like, I raise those because I start from the perspective that this is not a judgment on the individual. It's the nature of the game in high growth businesses. If you're at a more stable, more mature company, the challenges 3 years out may look more similar to the challenges today, in which case you can build a career there. And at companies where it is high growth, if you're the type of individual that just loves to constantly renew your own knowledge, your own domain expertise, your own capabilities, then maybe, you do scale alongside the organization, in which case it's fantastic. But I don't know, I think it's kind of unreasonable to expect that that the role will be substantially similar in 2 years, such that the person you hired is going to be equipped for success.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people kind of like it's easy to project out the future, right? Like that I'm going to hit that 4-step parlay, or that that the company's equity is going to be worth an absolute ton. And I think a lot of people get really optimistic on that. But I think going into it with that mindset on your side and setting the right expectations is a really mature way.
I think it also feels if you're a good human, it feels like maybe you're not being loyal or you're not taking care of your people. And I think, the listenership obviously is just getting to know me right now, but if you talk to any of my employees, current or former, I think the first thing they'll say is that I care deeply about the team and the people. Like I want people to grow alongside the company, and a lot of the individual contributors, whether on engineering or marketing or other functions, have been here for a very long time. And just at that executive level, the skill set shifts so rapidly in a startup environment that I think the clarity is the responsible thing to do. And by the way, if it's not a fit for them any longer, figuring out what the best way to enable that person in their own career journey is going forward. Like, if somebody is willing to stick on and learn from somebody else that's being hired, that's fantastic. If they're excited about that, I would love to keep them. If they're more excited about going and finding a new role, I'm going to go to bat and try to help them find that new role. That's the side. It's almost being, it's the trap of people pleasing or wanting to be perceived as nice and doing the person an injustice by keeping them in a role where they're not enabled to be successful.
I agree. One of my favorite CEOs that I haven't had on the podcast yet, and I have to, he's got a great saying. He's like, if somebody's not scaling with the business, the first thing I need to do is figure out the story I need to tell them about why that's not working. And then the next thing is I need to get with them and I need to help them figure out the story that they tell to the market of why we're moving on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
really, it was like, that's a humane thing to do. It's just like, if you've decided that you're not going to scale, like I'm in your corner. You've been a good person, like as long as everything's ethical and on the up and up, like I'm
Totally.
here. I have tons of people that I've worked with that haven't fit for one reason or another. And 99% of the time, it's like, great, cool. Like I had to have that conversation with you, but now I'm here to help you with the rest of your career. The ones that are the worst are the ones where they can't emotionally deal with that first part of the conversation because it makes it very hard to help with the second part of the conversation. Let's maybe shift to how do you find talent? I think we were talking before you hit
Mm.
record. I guess pretty much every exec, the first thing you do is you ping your network. But where do you go after that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You pick your network, and that's inclusive of not only, I mean, you kind of start on a hierarchy here, which is you start with the people that you know who might be a network. And by the way, for listeners, this is obvious, but obvious advice is worth restating. When you go out and ping your network, the ask isn't just, are you open to hiring? It's, are you open to a conversation about what we're looking for? Because if you have a good set of people that you would maybe hire, they probably know people that you should know that might be open to hiring. And so you start with casting that net, and then you go through your kind of extended network, whether that's board members or investors or advisors, people who can really rep for you. I have found here that depending on your business, on the stage, your investors, this is all quite different. But for us, some of our venture capital firms have been really, really helpful for exec hiring. I think the jury's out. Some VC firms will represent that they help with hiring at all levels. And that is true for a small section of the VC firms, but they're all really, not all, but they're most really good at exec hiring, and they can be really helpful
Agreed.
there.
Agreed.
And then third is, once that's exhausted, and I think you can exhaust this pretty rapidly. I mean, like, we're not talking about like months here. We're talking about, weeks at most. And often I'll do this in parallel. Then you start to look to engage a exec recruiting firm. Now, again, depending on your company, depending on size, depending on stage, depending on cash balances, you may or may not want to engage an exec firm. It can be abhorrently expensive. The bills are obnoxiously high. However, if you do have the resources, like, look, this is a high leverage person, you want to get access to the best talent you possibly can, hopefully the ROI on engaging that recruiter is pretty clear.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any favorite recruiters you want to give a shout out now?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I've worked with quite a few, and I have to say, Cohn Group gets the representation. It gets kind of the rep on the street of being the gold standard for GTM hiring, and in my experience, that's true. One of the things that whether you're cynical about this or not, I think makes intuitive sense is that, look, if you're known as being top tier, whether or not that's true, and I do think it's true for Cohn Group, but some people have different opinions. Whether or not you think that's true, the reputation is worth it on its own. It's kind of like, the name brand of a college. Like, you get more people who, make themselves available to that group. And so you get higher access of talent, in my experience.
I like that. Yeah, if you are an exec and you're not building relationships with top recruiters throughout your career, it's a mistake. A lot of people are like, I only take the calls when I'm looking. But I think the people that really play the game well,
Yeah.
they have the 5 to 10 recruiters that they talk to every year, and
Yep.
they get the cards from them, or they send cards to them. And I see those people that have just, I know, I mean, if you are an exec and you're looking for your next thing, you should know the 7 recruiters you're going to call.
Yeah.
And Cole, deeply respect them. We love them.
Yeah, they're great. And then I will say, I won't name names on others, but I'll give the blanket advice that outside of Cohn Group, in my experience, I've worked with some of the name brands that you've heard. There's some really incredible partners in those firms, and there are others that may not work. And then so you really, you can't just go off the name brand of the firm. You got to know the partner. That's true everywhere, but get to know the partner, get some back channel references. And then the last thing that I would note is, for me, and this is a little bit of a me thing, and it's also a little bit of a Clockwise thing. One of the things that I really index on with the recruiters is their ability to tell our story.
Yeah.
Because Clockwise is kind of a weird one, I mean, like, we help people optimize their time, but it's kind of a PLG company. It's kind of a B2B company. The underlying technology, people might be like, well, doesn't Calendar just do this? So, like, the ability for the recruiter to kind of inhabit my space of storytelling, of being able to pitch the company and rep it, like, they're the front door all of a sudden. This is the person that most people are going to get to know Clockwise through. I don't do the initial call, the recruiter does. And so on that front, storytelling is really important. And then confidence that I know the person who's going to tell the story is doing a good job, because sometimes you might be talking to a partner, but the person doing the initial outreach is, somebody who's an associate or working underneath them or doing kind of the first batch outreach, which again, in some contexts is okay, but then I want to know that that person can tell the story well.
I You think deeper than about recruiters than most people. I'm really impressed. One thing you said that really stuck with me is, and I've seen, is we spend a lot of time with VC talent teams. A lot of them we've sat down with most of them, been like, well, who are the recruiters you respect and do, because we collaborate with a lot of those recruiters, and those VCs are incredibly particular about, at
Yep.
this firm, I will work with that partner on these types of
Yep.
deals, but I won't work with this one. And so, like, to know that that's happening inside firms is there, and it really is. It's about getting to know the partner at the recruiting firm, not the firm itself, which I think is a key one there.
And this actually brings me to kind of another piece of advice, which is involve your board. And there are a few different reasons, but the one that you just raised is actually, in my experience, the most important, which is the talent, the recruiting firms also know that the investors have really stringent opinions, and they also know that the investors are the repeat players in the room. Like I may, as a CEO, hire, if I'm working with Cole Group, I've worked with Cole Group twice, over the course of 8 years. Maybe in the span of my entire career, I'll work with Cole Group 3-4 times. The VC firm is going to work with that firm a lot of times. And so, even if, this says nothing about the recruiter. Like, people hear this advice sometimes and they think I'm, I don't know, I'm being cynical about the recruiters or whatever. It's just human nature. Like, they're going to sit up straighter and pay more attention because they know that the partners in the room, that they might have other business opportunity, negative or positive, depending on their performance in this search. And so, if you don't have a board member that you can bring in for that reason, I would look to bring in somebody else who is kind of a proxy for that as a repeat player. It might be an advisor who's really well known in the industry,
or one of their talent partners at one of those VCs could be a great one to do as well too, right?
Yep.
I love that. Oh geez, I just had a question and I forgot it. Oh yes. But before we hit record, you said have a board as a point person. Does that extend beyond leverage with recruiters? Is it also like for decision making and counsel? Like, how do you think about that point person as a board?
I find it's very, very helpful to have the point person as a board because one of the things that can happen with any group, inclusive of a board, is that if the responsibility is diffuse, the action is diffuse.
Yeah.
And so by stating and having, this is not like anything overly formalistic. I'm not making the board member sign a contract, but just by saying okay, John is on point with me for the product search, and here are the expectations. I mean, John's going to be literally on every recruiting firm call. Like, we'll have them on a weekly basis. John will be on that as well with me, with the recruiter, and we'll be going through and evaluating. It extends at a couple levels. So I love having the board member in that call, again, to make that recruiting firm really perform. But also because it gives, your investors want to see you win, but they also have a lot of stuff going on. And if they're there, and you have them sat down for 30 minutes to go through pipeline, you just get a wealth of information that you don't get if you're asking them to review an email. And the wealth of information comes in a variety of forms. One of them is literally who's in their network. Like, they will, and you should work with your whole board to get their entire network, but the depth that you get from that point person board member is just a little, they'll double click, they'll go down the rabbit hole of who the secondary connections are. But then you also get their view and their opinions, they are a repeat player. They've seen this proceed before. And so I'm a software engineer at heart. I've worked with a lot of software engineers. I'm technical, and I've still found the view of my board members on who has good technical execs to be really eye-opening in circumstances. Be like, oh, that company, I don't know, unless it's in this department, yada, yada. So that is really fantastic. You have to be careful. Investors can be overly confident in their opinions. As with all things, you have to take it with a grain of salt and kind of, incorporate it into your own viewpoint. But then also they'll help with closing. like, so this person has been through the whole cycle. So now they know, where did this person come from? What does Matt think of them? How have the interviews gone? And then when it comes time to close that individual, your board members can be extremely valuable. Because, the candidate knows that they're, obviously biased, but at the same time, they're not directly in the company. They have a horizontal perspective. They're kind of somebody with, representation in the industry. They're really valuable in closing. But you do have to be conscious of like how much you're engaging the board and how much you're wearing them down with the responsibility.
Yeah, definitely only at the exec level on this side. Do you use Clockwise with your board as well too, to schedule?
Yeah, we do. You can set up Clockwise with group links, so you can have, Clockwise primarily helps optimize team time internal at an organization, so you can have downtime. But we do have a robust kind of AI-driven Calendly equivalent, and so we'll use those links when we're scheduling with external candidates because it helps synchronize kind of the board member and my schedule. It's quite nice.
That makes sense. Like when I'm at Carta or Box or someplace like that, 95% of my meetings are internal. So the ability to like
Yeah.
shift things, move things. That's honestly, that's what my EA did, was
Yep.
shifting and moving things. And so the ability to have Clockwise do that for you is powerful. Maybe shifting quickly over to how do you assess candidates? We've already talked a lot about this in the process, but like, do you have an approach or a style that you use in interviewing people?
So I could go on forever about this. I think about this in phases. The first phase is going to be just, when you're screening candidates, and you have to start with a strong perspective of what the mission is for this person.
Yeah.
What are you hiring them to do? And I forget, you may know, Andy, the book that I'm pulling this from. It's a very common recruiting book, but I like to orient on a mission, like one liner, like what is this person's mission at the company to do over the next 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, love that.
And then you break that down into different skill sets and areas that you need to have proficiencies. I often like to stack rank those. So it might be like, for every exec, you need them to be able to hire well. You need to have them be able to grow the team, manage the team. You need to have them be able to hit their targets. But like, you might stack rank those differently, and the specificity that you get into might be different. If you have an organization that really needs a management layer, it's like you really need to formalize and mature this organization over the next year while being able to hit your sales targets. And that's like slightly different than the person who just like, you need to build out the systems for being able to achieve sales targets and then make sure that you're hitting them. So that level of specificity will help at all stages, but especially when you're screening candidates, you're looking for like, what's the type of company that they were at, where their skill set come from, what are their matches. And at that stage, I do like to take an early call before we're like, the recruiter will get on, but then if it's passing, I'll want to connect with them. I'm really selling at that phase.
That was exactly the question I was going to ask you. I guess, you're probably like first 2 minutes you're evaluating, and then you flip into sell mode for the rest of it.
I've tried to fit kind of selling and evaluation into that call, and I never do it. I end up selling. I'm a product person, and there's a model that actually Darius Contractor, he's a growth person, put out, which is kind of like the energy of an onboarding in a product. And basically I'm bastardizing this, but it's like you only get so many calories in an onboarding, and so you have to build them up in order to spend them down. So like you got to get them excited. You got to get them excited about the product and get them engaged, get them in there so that then you can make an ask. And you can only make so many, and you have to make it at the right times. And with recruiting, it's kind of similar. We're like, I'm about to put them through a real ringer of a process. Like there are a lot of panels. They have to be with board members. They have to be with me. There's the comp discussions. It's a lot. It's a lot for somebody to take on, especially a busy professional. So like that first call, I want to get them pumped about the opportunity. And by the way, if they're not pumped about the opportunity by the end of that call, I don't need it. That is as good of a screen as any. If the skill sets look good on the resume, and I can get in, I can sell for 30 to 45 minutes, and they're still not excited or engaged, great. Let's part ways. You're saving me time.
I like that. I tend to be sale in the first if I'm a hiring manager. I also will do my favorite one is what questions do you have for me? And then I'll do to give them time to formulate if they haven't. I'm happy to spend as much time in this interview as you need on questions
Yeah.
because it helps me. And I'll just keep talking for 2 or 3 minutes to kind of fill the space. And then at
Yeah.
that point, if it's the lame questions, I'm done. But I feel like I can generally sell by taking their questions and then kind of converting them into sales. So it helps me kind of evaluate a little bit in that. But I agree with you that you really are selling up front.
And this is somewhat personal to me, but I think everybody should do it. I, as a leader, I get a lot of my juice out of the team because they trust me and they feel like I'm a high integrity person that they can put their faith into.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious of you are always building a relationship with this person from the first call all the way through, the very last day at the company. And so I'm very open and very honest, sometimes unabashedly so. And if that, if I see something on the resume and I'm like, why? Like I've literally had opening calls from like, why are you coming here? Like, this isn't like, it seems like you should go like to this company or that company. And I just like coming out of the gates with like very open, authentic conversation helps lay the foundation for the rest. So by the time that we're talking about comp or something else, like, or I'm answering a question that's sensitive, I've at least built up again, those calories such that they have the expectation that like it's real. I'm not just bullshitting them.
Yeah.
So I think that's also an important element is, while I am selling in the start, I am careful to not overhype. Like I will give them, why this is an exciting opportunity, why I think this would be a great fit, why I'm really excited to work here, but also like here are the challenges we're facing, here's what's interesting about it, and if they ask something like that's very pointed, I'm happy to answer it.
Is there limits to the candidate diligence questions that they can ask? I generally guide top candidates, get the offer first, but then, take your time, ask the hard questions because a lot of people will show up and it'll be different than promised. I think it's neat that you're candid in there, but like say you're trying to
I
close a candidate, can they ask too many questions or how do you think about that?
There are some areas where if you ask, it's going to give me a negative signal, and it's not because I won't answer the question or I think it's too sensitive or it's somehow like gauche to ask. But specifically, if we open up for questions, a lot of the time is spent on, for example, compensation in the
Yeah.
opening. That's going to be a bad signal, not because I mind answering those questions. Like, fine, like I'll open book, I'll answer them to the extent I can. To some degree, it's a match with you and what we evaluate, so I can't give you like a firm offer at the start, but like I'll give you a sense. But if we spend a lot of time there, what's going on in my head is like, what's their motivation?
Mhm.
Are they motivated by the package at the end of the day? And everybody is to an extent, of course, like you should be. We work because we get compensated for it, but like there's a part of that where I want to understand what really makes that person tick. And if they're just a mercenary, it might not be the right fit.
What other things give you negative signal?
Sorry, I can't help myself on responding to that. I think
Yeah, please.
for
Yeah.
me personally, I think that's good general advice, Andy, because I think for a lot of people that's right. Like if you're a candidate, you're working as a funnel yourself. So like you don't want to create a point of friction right at the outset unless you really do have hard barriers. Like if you're wondering like, hey, I have a family, I have to make like, 200K to even make any of this work. Like I think it's okay to broach that with some degree of deference at the start. Be like, look, like I'm not like my primary motivation is fit and having high leverage and impact here. But I do just want like, are you guys in market range for your fit size stage for this? And if the answer is yes, it's yes. If they're evasive, then maybe you get some signal out of that.
I think you're right. I think a couple of things. One is like Cole's not going to work with you on a senior role if you're way off on comp,
Yeah.
or they're probably going to talk to you. And then if you're working at a company that's like C and beyond, they generally have a total rewards team and they've comped it. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's going to be in range no matter what. And
Yeah.
I tend to the other way you can proxy this is let's talk about scope.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yep. Yep.
let's talk about
Yep.
like, okay, what's the scope of this team? What's there? And if the company's way off on scope and you get way down the road, like, oops, like, but you figure it out then.
Yeah.
So I guess I kind of feel like people do themselves a disservice on the compensation too early. And it's neat to hear you the same way, right? Like I want someone's passionate first.
Yeah. For other questions, I don't know if there's any that are like just per se always going to be negative signal. There's one that's bordering on it, which is if the person doesn't ask to some degree about the team or the team dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no specific question here, by the way. There's no like magic question that I'm looking for people to ask, but it does surprise me always when I get through a set of questions and I haven't asked at all about like the rest of the team, whether that sometimes it's about the executive team, sometimes it's about like who are the members of the team, what are their backgrounds, but like I want to know this person, like ultimately what an exec does is it amplifies the team. They provide leverage by amplifying the impact of the team that they're deployed with. And so like, it's weird if they don't ask about that. It's not necessarily a blocker. Everything else,
the colleagues or the directs?
Either. I want to see either, ideally both. I love it when an exec starts asking me about like, hey, I was on LinkedIn, I was looking at the profiles of your other execs, like, looks super interesting, like what's this and this like? And by the way, like, okay, what's the scope and size of the team that exists? Where do you think gaps are with the team? Like, what are the, I love when somebody really pushes on that set of questions because there might be situations where you're hiring an exec truly just to run and tackle a specific issue absent the larger team, but I can't think of one. Like I can't imagine one.
No, I mean, one of my favorite questions when the RevOps space is like, tell me about the GTM decision-making structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that the CEO deciding between sales and marketing? Is that a CRO? And it's like, if you don't ask those questions, you're like, you've given me a team, it's this big, here's the budget. Like, you have no idea what you're walking into.
No, and that's like the general, I wouldn't have thought to say this, but just riffing on what you said, I think that what I'm really looking for is a set of questions where the person is really trying to suss out if they'll fit well.
Yeah.
Like, if you're actively asking questions about, the decision-making structure, about what the challenges are, about the team dynamics, that gives me the warm and fuzzies as a hiring manager because what I'm seeing is somebody who's like trying to evaluate if they can really have impact on the role. Like, do their skill set fits? Like, I love to see that. Now, and that kind of goes in the opposite direction too, which is that if this is for example, if I'm hiring a salesperson in a Clockwise and we're primarily a product-led growth company and they're talking primarily about enterprise marketing spend, that, all of a sudden I'm going, oh, this person is not thinking about this role the right way. Like there are a multitude of ways that you can tick me off that like, you're really not fit for this role because you're just coming to it with a perspective that's not going to be a fit for the role. And again, this is where I may have missed out on good candidates for this, but I think the filter is worth it because it's probably accurate about 75% of the time, which is if you come into those first calls and you're thinking about the role, like, I don't know how to express this. I want to help you understand the role. I want to help you get to the bottom of what you're being hired for. But if you're coming in and you're fundamentally off about what the nature of the role is, and you're coming to it with like your own baggage, your own perspective, I've never seen that really correct in a good way. So it's a pretty strong signal.
Here's my favorite for skip levels. So say you've got a person who works for you and you're later on the panel. My favorite question is, in your own words, describe the role you're interviewing for. If they can't nail that and it doesn't match with what's in my head, it's like an immediate no, right? And so, I think it's like there's the MI, the hiring manager, which is very different. I think yours just hit on that. If I'm not the hiring manager, I have that question gets in front of me almost every time. Yeah. Well, this has been, I mean, we could go on for another hour if your Clockwise would shift, we probably could, but which it probably can. But thank you. This was amazing. We got into some board level discussions that I haven't with other folks, and I think it really lends an additional light. Maybe our last question, and I'll innovate on a little bit, but is there a CEO or some other executive who you really respect how they hire that we should have on the show?
I have one, but he's so thoroughly retired that he won't bite. So okay. I'll answer the question, but unfortunately, it's probably not going to lead to another podcast guest. There's a guy, Bob Cohn. He was CEO for decades of one of the original voicemail companies. We're talking about like hard cassettes in racks. Sold it to a telco company. Led that company to, well, originally led his own company to become public, then acquired, and then was exec, and then was at Sequoia for a few years. Bob is fascinating. He gave me his download on how to hire execs, and I was just like, Bob, I cannot pull off how you do this, so it's not me. I'm not going to do it, but I respect the hell that he did it. He would spend 2 hours with the candidate, going deep at every level. Almost like, the reason that made me uncomfortable is almost a psychological diagnosis. I'm talking about like, what were your family dynamics like growing up? Where did you grow up? And the reason that I respect it is what Bob is really trying to understand at a very deep level is what makes this person tick.
Yes.
Like, what is motivating them? What gets them up in the morning? What lights a fire under their ass? Where do they have blinders? Where do they have gaps that they know about? Like, really trying to deeply understand the human so that he can partner with them effectively when they're in the role, or understand that they're not a fit for the role. And that sort of like deep level, it feels so probing that it's gone out of style. But I find it fascinating.
I love it. Well, Bob, if you're listening to this, your protege Matt has gotten really good at hiring, and he's shared his with that. If Bob wants to come on, we'd love to have him. And Matt, thank you. If people don't know Clockwise, and you're working in a large org with not enough time on your hands, check it out.
We can help out. We help out millions of people, so please do.
Thank you. Have a great day.
See ya.